All right, folks, I want to welcome our guest to the show. It is Jonathan Redbird Dover, retired Navajo Ranger. Welcome to the show, Jonathan.
Thank you. Thank you. It's good to be here.
I am glad to have you. I've wanted to have this conversation for a while. So I want to give the audience a little bit of background about how we got where we are. I was obsessed with unsolved mysteries as a child, and I do a lot of research, obviously, for the show. I read a lot of books, and I watch a lot of documentary television. So I stumbled across the reboot of Unsolved Mysteries just a couple of months ago. And I was fascinated with the episode that they did featuring you and Stan, former Navajo Rangers, and the investigations that you did. So, and I saw you on Doug Highcheck's show with he and Alex, and I have been fascinated with the law enforcement background and the paranormal investigations. So I'm sure there are other people out there who may not be familiar with you and the Navajo Rangers. So let's start there and talk about your law enforcement background and your time as a Navajo Ranger, and then we'll move into how you got involved in these paranormal investigations.
Okay. The short version of the story is that they were looking for a ranger. I had no idea what a Navajo Ranger was, but I applied. And I had one question that was asked of me during my interview. That was, how would you feel if somebody came and threatened your life or the life of your family? And so I told them, I says, I'll cut their ears off at 300 or 200 yards with 300 Savage. And they said, you're hired. Come to find out that the two Rangers before me one of them was beat up rather badly and sent home. The other one was, they threatened his family, and he put all his stuff in his truck and quit and just left his truck out at the local chapter house. So I got the job. Next thing I know, they send me a memo saying, you'll attend the 6-month police academy in Window Rock. And if you don't pass the police academy, you'll be terminated. So needless to say, I finished the police academy, 6 months of training. I finished as the Academic Achievement Award, the Marksmanship Award, and the Outstanding Cadet Award. I was in line for the other two, but they didn't want a ranger sweeping the awards for a police academy. So Physical Fitness Award was changed to Most Physically Improved, and Leadership Award was changed to Most Spontaneous Leader. So anyway, I finished the police academy. I went afterwards to more training. I was also the last ranger to be assigned to work with the National Park Service for a period of 6 months at Canyon de Chelly to learn how to do what they call interpretation, which is meet and greet with the public and converse with them and not be afraid to talk to them. So after all that, I started my career. Since then, I spent 4 years initially with the Rangers. I went to the City of Winslow, Arizona Police Department and became a patrol officer in the city. I did that for 4 years and finished as a patrol sergeant. And I was the first Native American sergeant to ever be promoted to that rank. They told me that I had to live within the city limits of the town. And I had just had a brand new house built where I live now in Loop. So between a brand new house in 1988 and staying in the city renting a trailer, I chose a house. And so I left there and went back and got on with the Rangers again. After that, I went to the Historic Preservation Department for 9 years and did archaeological law enforcement as a specialty. So back to the Rangers in the year 2000, I attended the Criminal Investigation Academy at Glencoe, Georgia, which is where all the criminal investigators go. And a lot of the other agencies train there. and finished that course. And so altogether, I've had about 4,000 hours of training. I'm a specialist in archaeological law enforcement investigations. I have my creds as a criminal investigator. Um, I am an instructor in mountain rescue and high angle technical rescue, and with ropes and stuff like that. And then I'm I was a licensed EMT basic, so I was ambulance qualified, and I would have injured people out where I was with an hour response time from the hospital. Um, and then I'm a federal firearms instructor, and I was an adjunct instructor at Gunsight Academy, which is in Paulden, Arizona. So that was for about 3 classes. So we, lot of training, a lot of investment there.
It definitely sounds like it. So let's talk a little bit about the Rangers themselves. Some people I was not familiar with there's so many different types of law enforcement. I know in the city of Atlanta, it seemed like every 6 blocks there was another jurisdiction that we were dealing with, where there'd be a GBI, federal, or some of the parks and rec police, and then the airport police. What were the Rangers' responsibilities, and how far ranging was the area that you guys were covering?
Okay, the Navajo Rangers were they were based on the National Park Service. The guy that formed them back in 1957 came from the Park Service and felt that the Navajos deserved something similar. So they were put together, and they are a resource law enforcement department. So we did game and fish, forestry, um, mines and minerals, water resources in the park areas where the park police, and there are 23 parks on the Navajo reservation, and a large number of lakes. So we're checking all that. We do the search and rescue. It's mandated to us. And oh, good grief, there is just so much. If you considered it a resource, a renewable or a non-renewable resource, agriculture, livestock, we did all that. I personally broke a $100,000 livestock theft case in the area where I worked. So lots and lots of different things. We found out that police officers that transferred in had a really difficult time just covering the basis. The Navajo Rangers they go through the Federal Law Enforcement Academy to get commissioned, and on top of that, they're trained up. It takes about 3 years to fully train a ranger, and that's just in the basics. Um, so we did all that between me and my partner Stan. We were probably the prototype rangers of what they were aiming to train up, being specialized in so many different areas. I mean, I was even trained in explosives and how to handle kin sticks and dynamite and stuff like that. So we were trained in wildland firefighting so that we could operate in the fire environments and not get burned up while we were there. So, and having an understanding of fire behavior. So lots and lots of different stuff. I thought it was the coolest job in the world. And then on top of that, we were trained in police work. And because the Navajo Nation has very few, they only have 250 police officers to cover 27,000 square miles of land and 7 police districts. The Rangers at the time I was there, they had 15 Rangers doing the same thing. And we would be hiking down canyons, looking at archaeological sites, checking fishing licenses down in the canyons, say toward Lee's Ferry, things like that. So you're talking, 700 to 900 vertical feet of hiking up and down. So, yeah, 27,000 square miles, just so you can get a feel for it, is about the size of the state of West Virginia. And, or you could say 17 million square acres of land. Um, it goes from desert and canyons all the way to a huge ponderosa pine forest, pinyon juniper, lots of deer, lots of elk, um, a big pine forest all the way through the reservation there.
So you're doing this work, and how in the world did you get to the point where you get the assignment to investigate these paranormal cases? How did that come to be?
Well, we had a couple of rangers get assigned to a case up in the Carrizo Mountains. The case involved a elderly couple that were up there. And once you understand elderly people that live out there, you understand that these guys, they know all the different sounds, they know all the different animals. They've grown up there, they live up there, and they reported that they had a Bigfoot step over the corral. You know, it's a wooden log corral that they have, maybe about 5 feet tall. This thing stepped over the corral, grabbed a sheep, tucked it under its arm, and stepped back over and walked off with it. So the two officers that were assigned were both rookies. And these guys had just been fresh out of the academy. If you knew them, and you probably know officers like this, they're joking all the time, have their own little private jokes and laughing and just have that little rapport amongst themselves. That's how these guys were. And they went up and they were doing the investigation, but as they were going along, they were giggling and laughing about their own little private jokes. Well, Grandma and Grandpa thought they were laughing about them. And so hang on a second. So they, excuse me, Grandma came down and she chewed out our chief ranger. And I don't know if you've ever heard the Navajo language, but to be chewed out in Navajo is there's no cuss words, but it's bad. And especially, we really respect our elders out here. So to be chewed out by an elder is even worse. And so he called everybody in to a major department meeting. And so everybody came in and he said, from now on, you will investigate these cases seriously. I want reports on them. These will be investigated professionally. And then I like to tell people that he turned to me and Stan, and we were in an area called Special Projects. Special Projects, we had our own SWAT team. We were co-commanders. We handled all the major cases. We did all the dignitary protection. If Arnold Schwarzenegger came onto the reservation, we would be his personal bodyguards. Johnny Depp came out and Stan worked with him, doing the Lone Ranger. So we did that kind of stuff, and we had a lot of investigations from other departments where they would request our expertise in civil investigations. So we started doing, I like to say we were voluntold. We didn't volunteer for it. We didn't raise our hands. They just, because we were the two most qualified. And the other thing we had going for us was that I was born and raised in Los Angeles, California. Stan was born in Fort Defiance, Arizona, but as a child moved to Tahlequah, Oklahoma, where his mother is from. And he was raised in Oklahoma. So we didn't have the traditional upbringing and fear of paranormal things. that a lot of the Navajos have. And so I think that's why we were chosen, was that we would go right into these things and not be afraid of them. Um, so we started doing those investigations based on that, and we were pretty interested in it. I mean, we looked at each other, and we at the time X-Files was really big, and we thought, oh my God, we're going to be the X-Files, you know. And we started having to purchase books and talk to people and get a hold of organizations and find out uh, how to uh, how to investigate these cases even better, so to speak.
Well, you get your new assignment. What is the first case that you and Stan get? What's the first thing out of the gate that you guys go out and investigate?
The first case occurred up in a place called Bloomfield, which is outside of Farmington, New Mexico. And in that case, there were 30 separate people that reported Bigfoot, sightings of Bigfoot along the San Juan River there. Those cases were all taken, a whole group of people went to the local police department there. The lieutenant came out to meet with them, and he basically laughed at them and said, ha 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 ha, how much of these people had to drink? And he said that to a reporter, and the reporter recorded it in the newspaper. So the people were pretty upset, and they said, we want nothing to do with the police department anymore. So they called the Rangers. And we sent a 6-man detail up there, which is about a third of the department. And we had forward-looking infrared systems. We had PVS 14 night vision equipment for the crew. These were basically our SWAT team. We were prepared. We spent 3 days and 2 nights at that location with nighttime stakeouts. And during that time, during the daylight hours, we went down the river and interviewed as many of the people we could find that had made these reports, and spoke with them. And we got quite a few interesting stories. One involving a kid that was, he actually was told they heard this thumping sound. The river valley, you know, it goes up on both sides, and the river cuts through the middle. And there's fields down there, you know, little fields, little plots where they grow stuff. And this family had a garden down there that was fenced in. And they heard this thumping, and they thought it was a horse down in the bottom in the field. So the parents said, hey, grab your BB gun and go run down there and chase those horses out of the field. The kid jumps down, goes racing down. You know, it's about, you know, a good 40 yards down the slope, and falls on his butt at the end. And he's looking up, and a Bigfoot is standing over the top of him. And he says this thing was about 7 or 8 feet tall. It smelled like a really bad, almost like a wet dog smell. And he said it just looked at him. He looked at it. He dropped his gun and scrambled on his, you know, backwards on his hands and his feet, turned around and raced back up that slope. And, you know, as near as he could tell, the thing just went over to the fence and stepped over. Later on, he showed us where it stepped over the 5-strand barbed wire fence, and it had left some hair stuck in the barbed wire. So we collected that. It had some of the tag ends. We found footprints in the sand. They were indistinct, but the distance, heel to heel, was 5 feet. So if I were to do a 5-foot stride for myself, I'd have to jump from foot to foot, or I would have to do the splits to make that distance. And I can't do the splits. So maybe when I was younger, but not anymore. So we did photographs and measurements. We found where this thing had taken a huge log, about 20 inches in diameter, that was waterlogged in a boggy area. Literally picked it up. It was half buried in the mud with standing water on top, and picked this thing up and just tossed it to the side, just like it was nothing. And we had a Bigfoot investigator that came along with us, and he said that it was probably looking for grubs or something under the log to eat. Um, we went back in the bush. We tracked all over the place. We sent the samples off to a lab, and you have to understand that these DNA labs, they have millions of DNA samples from all over the world. There's a whole library of DNA that they can compare these to, and they came back with a document that said unknown carnivore. So that was our first case. We didn't actually see anything, but there's plenty of evidence that something did happen.
One of the things that I've struggled with doing these shows, I'm former law enforcement, so I had a certain approach. I'm a trained investigator, I'm a trained interrogator, and I did investigations in the field. So it's a fine line for me when I'm taking anecdotal accounts of what people have seen. That's all my show is really about, is people sharing their experiences. So I have to be very careful not to interrogate the people, because I want them to come on and feel comfortable telling the story. So how did you and Stan navigate that in the field as police officers, investigating these things very seriously and walking that fine line between people being comfortable enough to share their experiences and not feel like you were interrogating them?
Well, it is a fine line, and I'm sure we crossed it several times. Um, our aim with this stuff is we knew that there was a lot of people out there that were going to say, "Oh, poo poo, this is BS. These things don't exist." So we set out to collect evidence. Number one. Number two, we vetted the people that we spoke to. We used a combination of questioning, of active listening, and body language. Looking at the body language, you as an investigator know that there are what they call micro tells that'll somebody will give away, or they'll give a rehearsed line or something else. So we went with this way of doing things, and we were rather harsh about the way we vetted people. We would tell them straight up front, we'd get all the basic information for the report: name, date of birth, location, phone numbers. After that, we would tell them, we're going to ask you some very, very embarrassing questions, and please excuse us, but these are required for our investigation, because we felt that we needed to investigate it to the point where we could present a case in federal court with a 99.9% verified, that we could go to the prosecutor with. So what we did is we would ask them, do you use drugs? Do you use alcohol? And if so, how much? When was the last time you used it? Do you use prescription medication? When was the last time, and what kind of prescriptions are you taking? Things like that. And then we would ask them, the subjugative, ancillary subjugative, we'd ask them, tell me your story. And they would give us a lengthy story, and we'd be watching them during this time. And you start looking for rehearsed lines. You start looking for the sandpaku in the eyes. All these tells that tell you that somebody is maybe making misleading statements, or falsifying information. And once you're satisfied with that, you'll see if that fits in to what you've collected as evidence first. We always went and looked at the evidence before we did anything else, and we let the evidence speak for itself. At the end of that, then we'd write up our reports, and if we had questions, we would ask them, "Could you tell me again about this part? Could you tell me again about that part?" Or, the old kind of Columbo line. I'm kind of wondering about this one thing, and you know, and you'd laugh with them and joke with them and keep them, you know. Juveniles, you'd have to talk with them with their parents there and make sure everything is above board. But we had some really, really good interviews as a result of that. And they were at the time we recorded them on micro cassette, and I don't even know if those exist. They were put in the files, and who knows where they went now. The department's moved a couple of times since then. We found out that a lot of our reports that were put in the system, they were locked down. So only we and the chief ranger could access them. Since then, the computer system was updated. We were using something called Cody. And when they updated the computer system, we were so out of date that they told us that none of the information was going to be able to migrate. And, we had something like 14,000 entries of just people information that we lost. Which was almost a disaster for us. But yeah, we did our jobs. We did that for a period of 11 years, and we just every year we'd have anywhere from 75 to a little over 100 cases involving UFOs, involving Bigfoot, haunting cases, and the legendary Navajo Skinwalker cases, which we figured were the most dangerous cases you can investigate.
Yeah, I definitely want to get into the Skinwalker stuff. But before we do, is there any other cases that you worked as far as Bigfoot that stuck out to you? And what was the general, I'm always curious about descriptions when people actually get to see these things, what they were describing as far as a physical description. So any other cases as far as Bigfoot that stuck out over those years, and what were people seeing and describing as far as the physical description of the creatures?
The physical descriptions were all over the place. We had 6-foot examples, which we were thinking were juveniles. We had, 7-foot examples that were seen. We've heard of red ones that had a different color, almost like a stripe on them. That was white. We had, and these were reported by government workers, by nurses, by professionals, USDA workers. So we've had brown ones, black ones, just the whole range of colors. We had a little girl or a couple of small girls that were chased by one after they got off at the bus stop, and they had a quarter-mile walk back to the house. And the brother came out, hearing them screaming, and came out and saw the Bigfoot heading the other direction. We had one that actually, one of the jails, I won't say which one, but they're all kind of built the same, were built back in the 60s, and they don't have very good ventilation. So imagine a long hallway and jail cells along the sides, and a big drunk tank in there with bars, and then a back door. And because there's no air conditioning, they would leave the back door open at night. And the jailers heard the prisoners screaming bloody murder. And they, got out their keys and opened the doors, went down the long hallway. And they said all these inmates, in the drunk tank, were all piled into one corner and, just screaming and hollering. And they said that a big hairy thing came in that smelled really, really bad and looked at them through the bars, and they started screaming and crowded into one corner. And they said the thing just stood up and turned and walked out the back door again. And, I'd like to think in my own mind that maybe some of these guys quit drinking, but who knows? So
Yes.
yeah, lots of different cases.
Well, I know one of the things that you were trained in was tracking, and I know you guys got out. I'm assuming you got to go on some of the fresher cases. Were there any occasions where you actually got to track one of these things or got close enough to track them?
There were actually numerous cases where reports were made where we did this as a matter of course of the investigation. Uh, we were trained as combat trackers, and so you're trained to look for people. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to determine what these guys are doing, what they're thinking. Are they taking the easy way? Are they going the hard routes? Um, are they zigzagging? And which way is the overall zigzagging direction heading? And you can actually start getting in their minds. How often are they stopping to look back? How often are they stopping to defecate or pee? Um, you can start. You look at are they running? Are they walking backwards? Are they trying to throw you off? Are they going over rocks? Sometimes, in order to pick up the track again, you're just looking for pebbles pushed into the surface of the ground. And once you find it again, you do what they call casting. For us, I like to go in a spiral and keep working out until you find the tracks again. Um, the longest I've ever tracked anybody was 30 miles, and I caught them. So we were on foot, and then the guy took off in a truck, and I actually tracked the truck and tracked it into a border town and found it at a bar. So it works. So we're very conscious about that. In combat tracking, one guy tracks, the other guy is on the side of you carrying a carbine or a rifle. And that way you can track and not be worried about being ambushed. You may have to box around if there's an open area where an ambush could be set up, then you could box around into the brush, come back up where the track should be on the other side and continue on. So we would track Bigfoot. We tracked him literally for miles. And in two cases that we had that we thought were very significant, his tracks, we came to an area of what we call trackable ground, which is if he had taken another step, he would have left an impression. The tracks just vanish at that point, just like he got pulled up into the sky. We started casting for the track again, see what happened. Nothing after that. So now we're backtracking. We tracked it back to the location we first started, and then we backtracked to see where he came from. Again, we run into an area where his tracks start in trackable ground, but there's nothing around there after we look. We started at that point to think that there's some kind of a connection. We started seeing correlations that when Bigfoot cases were reported to us, to our dispatch, there was a corresponding increase in UFO cases that were being reported, and vice versa. So we started thinking that maybe there's a connection between the UFOs and Bigfoot. Later on in our research, and as an investigator, you're not happy with doing a report. You're wanting to know why. You want to know the why of how this happened, why it happened, all the background, just like an accident, the point of possible perception, all the way back to before the accident even occurred. So we started looking at that. We started looking at the Bigfoot cases, at the UFO cases, at the haunting cases, and even the Skinwalker cases. And we came to the conclusion for ourselves that this had to do with multi-dimensions, that these things were disappearing into another dimension. And I know it sounds pretty far-fetched. We came up with this theory in 2009 after investigating these things for a number of years, but it was the only thing that fit. When you have an object that apports, that comes into our existence on this plane in a haunting case. In our case, we had 65 coins that appeared over 2 nights that fell out of thin air. Sometimes they'd come flying out of the corners of the room, hit people, bounce, roll, spin, flip. And over 2 nights, those 65 coins, which were pennies, nickels, dimes, quarters, all American change, all different years from 1917 pennies all the way up to 2000 quarters, and every one of them landed heads up, which is a statistical impossibility. So, and then Stan was, I think he was overworked on that one, because he called me and he says, "What do I do? These coins are just appearing." And I says, "Well, you have to map them out in the room. You have to measure from 2 walls and show exactly in the room where that quarter fell, and then photograph it, bag it, and tag it." He did that 65 times. So I think that probably took up the majority of his time. Well, he had 3 other investigators there to help him too. So we started seeing things like that, and in speaking with people up in the Pacific Northwest with Indian tribes up there, we found out that some of them had actually witnessed Bigfoot sitting behind a tree, looking at them, and watched them physically fade and disappear.
So you mentioned it earlier, and I know this had to be a battle for you guys, at least in the beginning. You're establishing yourself as being somebody who's investigating these things. There's a taboo that goes along with any of these types of cases for just about anybody who's experienced it, but particularly for Native American and then the Navajo Nation. So can you talk a little bit about the Native American and the Navajo specific oral traditions about Bigfoot and UFO and what I believe they call the Star People, and what is those oral traditions like as far as those things are concerned? How are those passed on, and how do people reconcile the Bigfoot and the UFO and the Star People in the Navajo Nation?
Well, the the Navajo and Bigfoot go back pretty much, hundreds and hundreds of years. There are old stories that the medicine men tell. The most recent one that I've heard was in the late 1600s, when the Navajos had acquired horses, and they found a Bigfoot walking through an area. The warriors used horsehair lariats that were, basically horse tails that were braided together to make ropes, and they lassoed this thing. And they said they were holding it between the horses, and it sat down. And they said it spoke to them in their own language, which I thought was rather interesting, because I've heard that that Bigfoot can communicate, but it comes into your mind. You can hear the words, but it's not actually vocally speaking to you. And they're saying that it basically told them, if you will take me to the area around Mesa Verde, I will not come back this way again. And so they rode with it between them all the way up, probably about 100 miles to Mesa Verde, and released it up there. So the Navajos say that if you sight a Bigfoot, do not look at it. They said that if you look at it in the eyes, it can take control of your mind, which is another idea for this idea of communication. Um, we think that it also operates using infrasound, kind of like an elephant. The sounds are so low and so deep that they don't even register to us. If you think about humans, our senses are so narrow. You know, on one side is a whole big band of infrared, and on the other side there's a whole big band of X-ray, and we can't see either one of them. We just see in a very limited visible range. So there's probably a lot of stuff that goes on that we are not aware of. The same with hearing. You're talking to a guy that I have to wear a hearing aid because of they had a theory that if you fired your weapon and you weren't used to the sound, that it would startle you, and so you need to practice without hearing protection. Later on, it took a class action lawsuit to get the tribe to offer for 1 year only hearing aids to those of us that were affected from that. So I have hearing loss and high frequency loss in my left ear. My family says that I'm with selective hearing now. That I only hear what I want to hear, but you know, I don't believe that. Just like snoring, you know, they tell me I snore, and I told them no, I don't. I stayed awake all night to see if I did, and I didn't. You know, so.
Well, let's talk a little bit about some of the other cases that you guys covered. Bigfoot wasn't the only thing that people were encountering out there. Were there any of the UFO or maybe even some alien abduction or lost time sort of cases that stuck out to you over the years of your investigations?
Well, we had cases involving. I had an orb that followed me for about, I would say, 35 miles. 2 o'clock in the morning, out in the middle of nowhere. And for those of you who may want to have more detail from around Indian Wells area in Arizona, all the way to the State Route 87 and Route 15 junction, about maybe 5 or 8 miles past that. So it's about 30 miles of time or length, you know. This thing it was green. It was a big ball about the size of a basketball. It followed me until it veered off, and I watched this thing. I thought about turning around, and the law enforcement type A personality that I am, you know, let's go confront it because I got a gun. And then I thought maybe that's not such a good idea. Being that it's 2 a.m. and there's nobody else, no other vehicle was out there. So, you know, thinking about it, I thought maybe discretion is the better part of valor, and I will continue on my drive. It veered off and went up on the mesa tops and followed me from about a couple of miles away, paralleled my course and turned red. And at that point, that was the only time in my whole career I felt maybe a little uneasy. We had a gentleman that actually saw a UFO that landed. He saw the occupants on the ground around his house. We interviewed him 3 different times over 4 years. His story never changed. So culturally, Navajos are they're an oral tradition people. When you talk about oral tradition, you're not talking about, oh, just tell the story correctly. You're saying that in the case of a medicine man, an enemy way dance occurs over 3 nights at 3 different locations. You're going out to get medicine and you're bringing it back. And during that time, the medicine man will sing about 250 songs. And each one of these songs has to be done in the right order, and the verses have to be correct. If they aren't, the whole ceremony is negated. So these guys, they train ever since they're very, very young children, and they have to get it right because there's a lot of people that are at these ceremonies that know how these ceremonies go, and they'll be, just like us, they'll be the first ones to call you on the carpet and say you didn't do that right. And you pay a lot of money for a ceremony, so if it's not done right, you want your money back. And so, yeah, culturally, uh, Navajos have always coexisted with Bigfoot. They're told just leave it alone. It exists. Don't look for it. Don't chase it down. With haunting cases, Navajos are told, you bury your dead within 4 days. If you don't, the spirit may decide it wants to stay here. The whole idea is that you don't even speak the name of the person who's deceased, because to speak their name is to be calling them back and to create that ghost to come back. So you don't do that. So there's a lot of things that go along with that. So yeah, there's you don't really consider when you live out here and you're tuned in to the culture. These are not superstitions. There's a reasoning behind it. It's not to say that we don't honor the dead. I mean, Navajos traditionally are buried with tons of jewelry. And metal detectorists, have found out that if you're trying to metal detect on the reservation around here, somebody will start shooting at you. And, they come to me as a ranger and say, somebody's shooting at me. And I says, where were the bullets going? Oh, they were going way over our heads. And I says, if they wanted to hit you, they would have hit you. But there's a body buried in that hogan, and they don't want you digging around in there. And besides that, metal detecting is not allowed on the reservation. So, you're going to have to go somewhere else.
I want to move into, I want to talk a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about the skinwalkers as well, but I have to ask this question because there's something that's come up. I live in North Carolina, and there's a rich Native American history out here in North Carolina. There's tons of mounds, and there's been reports of little people. I've interviewed several people that have seen these little creatures. Did you guys ever have any instances where people were seeing not these giant, hairy Bigfoot, but any of the little people? Did you have any cases that involved those?
Yeah, we had a case in the southern part of the reservation where a lady saw an extremely bright white light outside, something that had landed out there. And she says these little people came out. They were like little green. She described them as almost something like I'm trying to think of that movie with the gremlins. She said that they were like little green gremlins that were running all over her kitchen. Her windows were open because it's summertime and it's hot and there's no electricity, so there's no air conditioning. And she says that these things were just running all over her kitchen and living room area and then all zipped out the window again and took off. We've had reports of within the Hopi and the Navajo, they call the ant people that live underground. And the Hopis say that during the flood, the ant people allowed them to come into their home and kept them there until the flood went away. The Navajos, in turn, say that they went to a place called Shiprock and got on top of the peak of that thing and saved themselves. So again, universal flood that's recorded in archaeology too. I've had reports of little things running around. One guy, we had a case over in the New Mexico side of the reservation, um, where there were a bunch of little things running all over the ground and a Bigfoot amongst them. And the guy, one of the uncles, takes an AK-47 and starts shooting. And before they all decide to lock themselves in their houses, and afterwards, state police showed up, Navajo police showed up, and they said a government vehicle had government plates on the back, but it was a Cadillac Escalade, which to me doesn't fit because usually government services administration vehicles are the low bid. And so they're not going to buy Escalades, they're not going to buy Cadillacs. And they said this guy got up out wearing these battle dress fatigues, armed to the teeth, pistol, carbine, everything, all kinds of web gear, and walks up to the group of police officers who are doing what police officers do, which is stand around, smoke cigarettes, and tell war stories. And he chats with them and then goes back to his vehicle, opens the back. They said it lifts up. Just push a button and it lifts. Gets an ice chest out and goes over into the field in this area that's, open, and puts the ice chest down and opens it up. And they said smoke came out of the ice chest. And it picked up something off the ground and put it in the ice chest, closed the lid, put it back in his black SUV, and got in and drove off. So Stan went to investigate that case. We personally know a lot of those officers in that district. And when he went over there, none of those officers would talk to him, which is really unusual when you're on a name-to-name basis with somebody. And then the fire department had responded that night to this UFO case. The UFO was circling as these things were running all over the place. And they said that the fire department was on the way. They saw this craft circling, this UFO. They turned the fire truck around and went back to the station. So he went to the fire department and asked them, and they wouldn't talk about it either. So apparently all of them were told, keep your mouth shut or else. But we've never been able to verify anything else other than hear the stories from the people that were there that this happened.
We can't close out the interview without talking about the Skinwalker. It's one of the things that has really fascinated me over the course of just about everything I've ever investigated, more so than anything. And I know that the Navajo Skinwalker is deeply ingrained into the culture and the fabric of the Navajo Nation. So can you talk a little bit about some of the cases where people had seen or dealt with the Skinwalkers and what happened during those cases?
Yeah, we've had numerous cases, even cases that were reported to me by police officers. One involved a female prisoner that was arrested. She had been suspected of doing this stuff. She was in the back. They drive a Chevy Tahoe, and the middle portion is a cage with a seat. She was handcuffed behind her back. The seatbelt was ratcheted, back so that it wouldn't, if she leaned forward, it wouldn't go anywhere. She was taken back to the station, no stops in between. And when they got to the station, the officer got out and the suspect was gone, disappeared. That spooked him pretty bad. Most officers will not talk about this subject. It's very, very taboo. I am not. I guess I'm the only expert that'll talk about it. Even medicine men, unless it's in the course of their business, they won't talk about it. We had one guy. His name is Haas Lore, that was actually poisoned by one. He's an Anglo school teacher at the time, uh, up in the Pinyon area, and he saw this mangy dog. I mean, patches of fur that were missing, just covered in dust. Just skinny, looked like it was just going to fall over, like malnutrition and just disease. And it comes into his in his driveway, and he's working in the garage. So he grabs a 2x4, goes over there, and as hard as he can, whacks this thing in the head. And he says the dog fell down and urinated all over the place, which to him is the thing's dead. And so he goes. Of course, he goes in and tells the wife, hey, look what I did. I killed his dog. And she said, show me. He went back outside with her, and the dog was gone. So, he said that when he hit this thing, this cloud of dust came up. And shortly after, he got sick. He got sicker and sicker and sicker. And in his own words, he says, I was crapping out one side and puking out the other and laying in a pool of sweat. He went to the doctors. The doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong with him. And, our joke out here is they'll give you a couple of Tylenol and tell you to come back and if it gets worse. So he's just miserable and can't even hardly move. And his wife, or I should say his ex-wife now, and his neighbor got him out of the bed, carried him to the truck, and drove him almost 100 miles to go see a medicine man. And he goes to the medicine man. They take him in the Hogan. The son is with him too. And the son stayed back, when the medicine man invited him into the Hogan to do a ceremony. He says that the medicine man told him that if he had been another 2 hours or so, he would have been dead. They did a ceremony. They gave him something bitter to drink. He ended up vomiting, still. And he says the next day he's feeling better. And after that, he recovered. He asked the son was asked, how come you didn't come in? And the son says, because of that scary, dark man standing next to the medicine man, that I didn't want to go in there. And he saw a figure of another man that was just a shadow standing there, and it scared him, so he didn't want to go in. We had another guy that came out, and for those of you who don't know what a sizzle reel is, it's usually about a 10, 15-minute video where you're looking at possibly doing a documentary or a series. And so the producer came out with the cameraman, and we're sitting out by a fireplace. It's a built-up stone wall and we built a fire in there about maybe 25 feet from a Hogan. And as we're sitting there telling war stories late in the evening as the sun's going down, a coyote walked between us and the Hogan, stopped, as it's walking, and it turned and looked at us, turned again and trotted off over the hill. There's nothing. The Hogan is sitting on this rise, and there's nothing all the way around. No bushes, nothing where it could hide. Me and Stan looked at each other and we says, oh, whatever. We took off after it. We went running after it. And we topped the rise. We looked all over the place. We couldn't see it. There was like I said, no place for it to go. We would have seen it. Shortly after that, the producer got sick. He stayed sick for 1.5 years. Again, the doctors couldn't determine what was going on, how come he was sick. And he finally did get better after 1.5 years, but it took him that long to counteract whatever it was. We do know that the skinwalkers carry what they call corpse powder, which is ground up human flesh, and from a dead person, and other botanical poisons that are included in it. And they're usually carried in a piece of bone, usually your radius or your ulna, that's hollowed out, dried up, and they pack it in there and they carry it with them. And when they get near you, they can just take that and blow it right into your face and poison you that way. So in this case, that's what we think was at work. That the dog had this powder all over its fur, and in the case of this producer, that he was poisoned in some way.
I believe Stan had his own experience earlier on before his days as a ranger. Would you mind sharing that story for the audience and telling them what he experienced?
Yeah, he was at the theater in Window Rock. There's a little one stage theater there, and they show movies, or they did for a long time. Then it went under, and then it came back. It's still operating today, and he was asked for a ride by an old man to go back to a place called Sawmill. It's 10 miles to Fort Defiance, about another 8 miles to Sawmill, and it's up on a hillside. So on the Defiance Plateau. So Stan drives him over there because Stan's a nice guy. I mean, he'd give you the shirt off his back if he thought you needed one. And he gives this guy a ride. The guy tells him, stop right here. And it's out in the middle of nowhere, pitch black. It's getting late. There's no, street lights or anything. It's just pitch black. And the guy says, let me out here. And Stan asked him, you sure you don't want me to take you up, to a house or anything? No, just let me out here. So he let him off, turns around and starts driving again. So he's doing about 50, 55 miles an hour. And out of the corner of his eye, he sees something running on the on along the fence line. And he says that it comes closer to him and it's keeping up with the car at 55 miles an hour. And he's not wanting to look directly at it, but he's looking, kind of looking at it. And he says what he sees is something that looks like a greyhound, but it's white. And this thing is really lean and muscular. And the back comes up to the height of his window. So he says it's big. And he says it turns and looks at him. It turns to the side. And he says the eyes are lit up kind of like an exit sign in a theater, that kind of a orange color. He says the eyes are lit up and it looks like they're backlit from behind. And he says it just had a mouthful of teeth. And he looked at that thing and he tells, it's really funny if you watch him tell a story because he'll physically, he squirms down in his seat and he says he's just barely looking over the dashboard of the car and floors it and drives, the 5 miles to Fort Defiance. He says he doesn't know how he made the T intersection turn, but obviously he did. Gets home, bails out of the car, runs into the house, and his dad's sitting there. He's all out of breath and panting, and his dad says, "What the heck's the matter with you?" And he described what he saw, and he said, "Oh, that's a skinwalker." No big deal. You saw one. So,
Wow.
yeah.
So
there, over the United States, there's something like 575 Indian tribes just in the United States, another 500 plus in Canada. And each one of those has some version of a shapeshifter. You have the Wendigo, you have the Rake, you have the ones up in the Pacific Northwest. Uh, Everywhere we go, they talk about this. We come to find out that Africa has its versions of shape changers. Australia has its versions. Europe has its versions. Indonesia, Malaysia, they all have some version. South America. So it seems like it's not new. We think that they're manipulating DNA to affect these changes physiologically.
Well, Jonathan, you've done all of these investigations. I don't really know where you were before you started these investigations. And after going through, I think you said 11 years of this, where were you going in on Bigfoot and some of this phenomena? And where are you? What's the final word for you after these investigations and all the phenomena that you've seen other people experience and the things that you've experienced yourself? How has that changed your opinion of all of these paranormal things over the years?
Well, there's always been a fascination with this stuff. I mean, I can remember reading Charles Blitz's book on, on weird things happening and the Philadelphia experiment. And, I always thought, wow, this is great fantasy. But there was always an interest. And it wasn't until we started investigating these things that it started, now I want answers. And I'm not going to settle until I get answers that I'm happy with. Like I said, back in 2009, we started talking about how all of these are connected through dimensional gates, and we started looking at the Navajo creation story that shows that the people, the Dene, came up through different layers, different worlds. And they came from a world of darkness through an aquatic world, through a world with giants and animals, and they saw a hole in the sky. So they put a couple of things to climb on. They say reeds. It may not translate as that. We don't know. But they came up out of the ground in a place called Dineta, which is near the Four Corners, into this world that they call the Shining World. And when I started rereading those and reevaluating in what we knew, we started to understand that maybe they came through a dimensional gate or a portal into this world. And a lot of other Indian tribes have very similar stories that they came from somewhere else to this world. The Navajos have long said that star people have come to visit them. What I find amazing is that when you talk to elderly people, and I'm talking 80 years old out here, that grew up out here, they don't speak English. They'll tell you all these stars up here in the sky. They'll name them in Navajo, and they'll name constellations, and they'll name constellations that we can't see with the naked eye. You'd have to have a telescope to see these. So, I just find that amazing. And I'll have to say this, if you watch the series Skinwalker Ranch, every time in the early episodes they talked about skinwalkers, they showed a picture of this guy wearing a black mask with little white eyes and stuff. That's it's a dancer in Navajo, and he's depicting a god, one of the star people, and so he's not a skinwalker. Skinwalkers can come all they're different. It just depends on the personality of the skinwalker. Some of them are painted white all the way down, even their hair, and the paint cracks. We've heard of some that are half kangaroo and half human. Somewhere along the line, we think they got a hold of a kangaroo skin. They come in the form of dogs, coyotes, wolves, birds like owls, ravens, things like that. So, Yeah, there's a long history. Navajos won't talk about them. Do not ever go to anybody that says they're Navajo and start asking them about skinwalkers. It's they'll look at you, turn around, walk the other way. Because to talk about them is to invite them to come to you. They know when you talk about them. In fact, after I get done here, I'll be just doing my prayers and smoking myself, with sage to protect myself, just for talking about it.
Well, Jonathan, I really appreciate it. It has been absolutely fascinating stuff. I can't thank you enough for coming on the show and sharing the stories and sharing your experience. And thank you so much for your service to the community all those years and everything you did for the people that you helped on those investigations. It's truly an honor and a pleasure to have you on.
Yeah, and both me and Stan will be at the Contact in the Desert. We'll both be at the Roswell incident coming up. I will be at the Boreal Bigfoot Conference in Fairbanks, Alaska, coming up at the end of June. And if you would like to see the Netflix episode, it's season 3, episode 5, called Paranormal Rangers.
I will link to that in the show notes. You guys go over and check it out. Jonathan, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me on.
They say